I'm Stephanie Bricker. I work at the BGS leading our Urban Geoscience programme and have the pleasure of being chair for the European Urban Geology Expert Group at the moment. Today I'll talk about a case study for Greater Manchester, and my particular thanks to my colleagues who have all participated in the projects that are going to be presented to you. So I'll start by just talking about some of the drivers for urban geoscience, provide two examples of our work, one on brownfield land and one on sustainable drainage systems, and then I'll just finalise with a few key learnings. So our approach for integrated urban geoscience research is to think about the impact pathway from the research to delivering benefits. And often as scientists, we tend to focus more at that early stage of that pathway, the science that we do and the outputs that we might produce. And I think for our projects to be successful, we want to also be focusing on the other end of that impact pathway to think about how the science is going to be used and what benefits it's going to deliver to our stakeholders. And to do that, what we want is a strong science evidence base at the starting point, but to think about industry needs and in particular relevant urban and environmental policy. And ideally, we want to be working directly with the owner of the problem so that what we are delivering is suitable for our stakeholders. Before I get into the detail, I want to share some findings from our PhD student, Catherine Ascott, who is looking at how the use of geological resources can support more sustainable urban design. And as part of that process, she's been interviewing stakeholders who are involved in some of the large regeneration projects that are using geological resources. And I might ask this question to you all: what do we think their biggest considerations were? And I can tell you it wasn't geology. Their primary considerations relate to the cost of the project and how it's going to be financed, how they manage risk and uncertainty, and how they fulfill any relevant policy obligations. So obviously geology plays a part in all three of those, but as the geological community, it's up to us to be able to present information in a way that is translated for their key concerns. Catherine also looked at what are the key enablers. So what enables a really successful project? And quite reassuringly, some of the sort of overwhelming responses were about collaboration, communication, and delivering multiple benefits through your project. So if we look in detail for Manchester, I think this is a nice starting point. It's a good quote that we often forget that the geological history and the general history of the land is a really important guide to how we use our city in the future and what we can implement. So if we orientate ourselves to Greater Manchester, it's the second largest city in the UK with a population nearing 3 million people. And despite a thriving city centre, there's actually a high proportion of the population live in what would be classed as socially deprived neighbourhoods. It's a city that's earmarked for lots of growth and regeneration through new transport infrastructure and new homes, and actually will be a crucial city if we are ever to balance up the economy between the south of Britain and the north. And a lot of funding has been set aside to help Manchester deliver to these aims and to implement the new housing and infrastructure projects. But first, if we consider the past and the industrial legacy in Manchester, again, it's a very, very old city. It started out as a small town in the 1700s, and it really grew up around the textile industry, in particular cotton, and all of the industries that are associated with that. So the chemical works or development of the transport routes to move goods around, to the point now where we've seen lots of phases of growth and regeneration and new infrastructure planned, which will of course be built on top of those multiple phases of development within the city. If we consider the geology for a moment, this is a map of the Quaternary geology. It's an environment that has been glaciated in the past, so it's dominated by till deposits, which you can see in the blue, and glaciofluvial sand and gravels, which are shown in pink. I've included a cross-section here from one of our earlier 3D models, and it just sort of demonstrates that the surface geology only really hints at the levels of complexity that you see with depth, both in terms of the lithology of the units and in terms of thickness, where we see deposits of up to 40 meters, which for the UK is significant. Underlying that Quaternary geology, the bedrock is equally complicated. In the north of Greater Manchester, where you can see in the greys, we have coal measures and an associated legacy due to mining in the region. And in the southern area of Greater Manchester, these orange and pinks, we have Permo-Triassic sandstones, and that Sherwood sandstone group forms one of the most significant aquifers for groundwater supply in the UK. So we have quite a complicated shallow geology on which we're building. And I want to show the relevance of that for our first case study, which was looking at a Brownfield ground risk tool, which is led by my colleague Darren Barrero. And I want to return to my earlier point where I was suggesting we really need to think about the problem and we need to think about relevant policy. So in the UK, we're expecting to be building 300,000 homes a year. And the problem with that is that about 1 million of those homes are expected to be built on brownfield land. To help with this, local authorities or the city authorities create a register of brownfield land sites, and the Homes and Communities Agency, now known as Homes England, have developed guidance to help us estimate likely remediation costs based on geo-environmental information. So what we need to be doing is looking at the cost ratio in the business case for sites that are coming forward for housing, and whether there is sufficient economic case for the commercial sector or private sector to develop that land. And where that case can't be demonstrated, Homes England have a land fund to help bring those sites forward. So the solution here is having a better understanding of the financial viability of brownfield sites within Manchester. So we've been working on producing a brownfield ground risk tool, which uses a series of 2D and 3D geological and environmental data. And it provides two key elements. It looks at ground risk and it also looks at likely costs. And it does that for both land contamination, so the risk of associated with contamination and likely remediation costs. And it also looks at risks associated with geological hazards and costs associated with having to modify your foundation design because of those geological hazards. And it's really important that I point out here that this tool is not intended to replace any detailed site investigation. That's still expected to happen. But what it does allow is the local authority, in this case Manchester, to use it within their local development plans and spatial framework to get a coherent overview of all of the sites within their district. So the tool itself considers four main elements: how the land has been used in the past and what it's going to be used for in the future, what the risks are to the water environment, and what geological hazards are present on site. So that's using the available geospatial data and maps and models that we have within the BGS. So what we then have, we present a web, well, in some cases a web map tool or a map that is compatible with GIS systems to provide a risk score and costs where appropriate for all of the sites within their register. And this enables Greater Manchester Combined Authority to say which sites are financially viable and are likely to be brought forward by the commercial sector, and which sites are likely to need investment from their land fund. The next example I'm just going to briefly introduce to you is looking again at the financial case for sustainable drainage systems. So if we start with the problem and the related policy, back in 2007, the UK experienced very severe floods. They were summer floods associated with surface water flooding, not fluvial flooding, which cost particularly the insurance sector a huge amount of money. And in response to that, they introduced new policy, the Floods and Water Management Act, which required any new development to consider sustainable drainage systems, and in particular infiltration systems. The other consideration is that as we are becoming more urban, we're increasing our grey cover, so pavements, car parks, roads, etc. And in response to that, the water company in Manchester increased the amount that they charge for managing surface water runoff from properties, and the amount that they charged was based on the percentage of grey cover. And on the face of it, that seems like a sensible idea, but what it meant was that lots of schools and health sites, so the NHS sites, saw massive increases in their surface water bill. So the solution that was proposed was, can they implement sustainable drainage systems on their site? They would reduce the amount of grey cover within their property and therefore lower their water bill. And can they use the savings that they're making on their water bill to pay for the cost of the sustainable drainage system? So this was a project led by business in the community, of which we were one of many partners, and it was asking three key questions. Where is it possible to put a SUD system in? Where can they save money on their water rates? And what additional benefits could be realised in the process? So BGS was involved in answering this first question: where are SUDs suitable? And we have a geospatial mapping tool which provides information about the infiltration or drainage potential, the vulnerability of groundwater resources, i.e. you don't want to infiltrate where it's being used for public water supply, whether by putting a SUD system in you're increasing the risk of geohazards like land instability, or where there are significant constraints, like for example if you're in a flood zone. So we identified where it's possible to put SUDs in at the school sites. Then our colleagues in business in the community and in CLASP produced the economic model. So it was looking at where can savings be made on the water bill, and how long or how many years it would take to collect all those savings together to pay for the SUD scheme. So in the graph, we can see the number of schools and NHS sites that would pay back over a 5-year period, 10-year period, and 15-year period. And then the final stage of the project was to look at the additional benefits. So we were helping with mapping here in terms of where the surface water flood risk is highest, which parts of Manchester have poor air quality or are more socially deprived, where they would benefit most greatly from putting in the SUD systems. So just another example of where geological information can be used to help answer other related questions in the city. So just to finish off, some key learning points for us that with our urban projects in Manchester. A good science evidence base is a must for your starting point, having good data, maps and models, really focusing on how that information can be applied and deliver on the ground impact. And that can only really be done by working with others in the city. And finally, just a reminder that we need to collaborate and communicate at early stages throughout these projects. And I think that's a key theme in lots of the talks today. And thank you very much.